So space. When I say that, that probably conjures images like planets, stars, maybe rocket ships. You have the image of a rover roaming around on a distant planetary surface. Maybe if you're really technically inclined, you think about the challenges of anti-gravity, or how we'll have to feed people on long-distance voyages or colonization. Maybe if you let your imagination roam, you think about alien life or other fantastic creatures. But language? Again, maybe you go back to aliens and you imagine what we would do if we encounter alien species and what that first contact would be like. And these are interesting questions, maybe important questions. But these aren't the types of questions I'm going to talk about today. Right now, the intellectual energy surrounding space travel is dedicated to issues of space colonization. SpaceX and so forth are interested in trying to colonize planets like Mars. And they're primarily interested in issues related to the technological issues that surround these endeavors. But what about the human side? What happens to us after we end up there? In 2019, the Advanced Concept Team of the European Space Agency held an interdisciplinary workshop on this very issue. Well, actually more dedicated towards even further issues. They were interested in long-term interstellar travel. They knew we weren't about to launch the Alpha Centauri, but they wanted to know, what are the technological challenges? What are the human challenges? And so forth. And myself and my colleague Andrew Mackenzie, we contributed to this. We looked at what might happen to language in these contexts. And we went back to the past to forecast what would happen in the future. And our goal was to say, well, we can't predict the future, but the past is always a pretty good guide. So what do we know about language? Well, we have some pretty good clues by looking at the past. We know that language changes. All language change. The language we're speaking right now is not going to be the same language we speak in 40 years. Now, these changes are going to be subtle. They're not going to be massive changes, presumably, but they'll be there. And these subtle changes over time, over the long span of time, will lead to very fundamental changes. And we can see these in sort of systematic ways when we look at large spans of languages. So we can look at related languages like Spanish, Italian, and French, and sets of sounds in those languages, sets of words, and another set of languages like the German languages, the Germanic languages, like English and German, and where we find certain words that have sounds like P in our Germanic languages, we find F's and V's. And this is a systematic change that happened over the course as these languages split apart. Moving a little bit closer in history, imagine we were magically transported back to the early 19th century. It's 1802. Someone walks into the room and says, "My house is currently building." We would say, "Your house is currently building what?" Houses don't build things. Well, that's because in 1802, "my house is currently building" would mean my house is currently being built. And if we had some good news to share with our friend in 1802, well, good news, my friend. My child just got promoted. He would look at us as well. Besides commenting on our odd manner of dress, perhaps, he might also say, "We don't use the verb got like that." Because the verb got didn't emerge as a helping verb until 1850. Now, these, again, are small changes. And, this is 150 plus years, but over hundreds of years, these changes add up, and language changes in fundamental ways. And that's how we get new languages emerging. So imagine our Martian colonists, or whoever, are sent off on this ship. We know that their language is going to shift over time in these ways. But it's going to be presumably different than the ways in which that language will change here on Earth. The context will be different, right? On Mars, they're not going to have the same interactions. They're going to be stuck in this sort of isolated context. So another question Andrew and I asked is, well, are there other contexts from history we can draw to? Can we look in our past and say, well, this is similar enough that we can trace the line and say, yes, that's quite similar. We can use this as a model. Because we haven't, to my knowledge, been blasting people off into space saying, don't come back, y'all, before. So we looked at the ancient Polynesians, and they're very similar to this type of space travel we're doing now, just in a very different way. They were great explorers, and they colonized distant Pacific islands. And this led to very similar linguistic isolation that we might have in space colonization. Now you might be saying or thinking, but the ancient Polynesians wouldn't have the same technologies that we have today, right? We have media, we have telecommunications. I have an iPad, I have an iPod, I have an iPud, I have the next year's iDevice that's about to come out. And yes, this is all true. But media and telecommunications are not the great hold on language change that we think they are. In fact, evidence suggests that language change is actually accelerating during this period of media and technology. Because language is not just a means of communication. Language is used to encode who we are. It is through our language that we say who we are and who we want to be. We express our identity through how we speak and what we speak. And we do this consciously and subconsciously. And more than that, when identity clashes with what powerful people want, they can target that your linguistic being. We see this all the time. We see policymakers target the linguistic reflex of identity through education and through overt marking on language. And the same will be true as we send our Martian colonists away, that language will be encoded in this identity. And so these are things we have to consider. We have to say, well, what is the linguistic policy going to be of our Martian colony ship? But then maybe we should take a step back and say, if we're worrying about the linguistic policy of a potential Martian colony ship, maybe we should also worry about the linguistic policy here on Earth in 2020, where linguistic injustices are happening every day. Thank you.